So thanks very much for having us here. We feel very blessed to be a part of this room. All these like-minded people running their own paths towards hopefully a joint goal. We want to explain a little bit about what we do and the adventures we're having. So we're London Glades and we're ecological land design practice and we have a big vision for changing the landscapes of the urban future.
Yeah, so I think we're going to try and give you a bit of our inspiration, then unpack the challenges of kind of real world context of implementing these schemes and just showing you it's not that easy, unsurprisingly, and then maybe show some of our work at the end.
So my background is I've been a gardener for most of my adult life, and in the meantime I was a musician and having some pretty cool spiritual experiences, and I really thought that music was going to be my way of standing up and giving a platform to some of these cool ideas. But there seemed to be some blockages along the way and it didn't seem to happen. And then I read a book called The Gardening Awakening by Mary Reynolds, which was a real life-affirming book that changed my vision of where I should go in life, and looking at permaculture and ecological designing and how redesigning and connecting in urban spaces could actually be something that could be really important legacy and a journey for myself. So I went and put all my energy into designing a garden, and we started at Hampton Court Palace, and we got Best Garden for a Changing World, which is really exciting, and it kind of catapulted us into a new world. And that's where I met Steve.
Yeah, so my background's similar. It's a similar story that I was an artist, photographic artist, and for one reason or another fell out of love with that, and didn't earn any money was the main issue. So retrained in horticulture, and then specifically design soon after. But I think the point we're trying to make is we both had a shared goal. We came from different perspectives, but we joined together to hopefully make an impact on a bigger scale.
And it's kind of funny how gardening can really change the world from our point of view. You know, that connection we have with nature, our own personal connection, can really do massive changes. And we work in the domestic field quite a lot, but where me and Steve have a lot of passion for is getting this into big spaces and making some major changes. And the idea of the genius loci, of being able to design, visualize, and then create large spaces that have a real impact on the spirit of place, and in turn the spirit of our collective consciousness. So how do we create and change spaces that, rather than just the people who are into this, just the general collective consciousness, how do we raise that? How do we make spaces that are immersive, naturally engaging, and lift us all together?
And also open to everyone, because coming from the domestic sector, generally it's big budgets, which mean we can do what we do. But in terms of public space, provided the funds are there, which we'll unpack the challenges of that a bit later on, is the fact that everyone can benefit from these schemes, young or old, whatever background, whatever income.
And it's really important that we do make these big changes pretty quick, as we know. And it's how do we get into the mindset of those people, into the masses that aren't necessarily the people who come to here and have these talks together. And working in this field, you know, seeing what happens on the landscape industry, it's a bit stuffy, it's a bit dusty, it's not really that forward thinking. And so this is why it's really cool to come to places and meet people like yourselves and see other aspects of what people are doing and how we can work together on really changing that. Yeah, that's great. So the idea is, yes, we know that we need more nature connection in our futures. That's really important, and there's a wealth of information that's been said better than us here today of the research that's a part of that, you know. But real nature connection in cities, it's not easy. It's not just a case of us just putting in a couple of trees here and there. The idea is to have real ecological connections.
So there's two big themes in landscape, urban and rural, I guess. The urban one, as John said, been unpacked a lot already, but this disconnect we've got in our immediate surroundings, but also with each other, is a massive problem for mental health community.
And there's this massive thing of like, why don't I just go and move out into the countryside? You know, I feel a lot better out there. But actually, as you may know, it's pretty sterile out there at the moment. I recommend anyone who hasn't to read George Monbiot's book Feral, or Isabella Tree's book Wilding, which shows the massive problems that are happening in the agricultural world and how behind they are.
And is this idea that the countryside is somehow this natural space, and it couldn't be further from a natural space? So I think that the opportunity there is to fix our immediate surroundings, so perhaps the urban landscape can become almost an environmental oasis amongst maybe the situations we can't control or the landscapes we don't have an immediate contact with.
And there's some really exciting pioneering stuff that's happening in the ecological landscape and design side of things that really shows so much potential for this, how actually through man-made human designs we can actually create these urban oases or these ecological oases by looking at ecosystems and then creating something that can actually be more carbon sequestering than even natural environments due to the way that you put layering together, etc. So there's real important and exciting developments that are happening that show how we have got a role to play in this future and how that humans can be a part of something quite exciting. And for us, the urban space, as we're all moving to it and there's something about it that's really exciting and there's a melting pot and multicultural, you know, why can we not put this into our urban landscapes in that exciting way?
So, what is nature? I don't think we're going to unpack this in 10 minutes. But this is a question that has been the building blocks of our initial meeting and provoked many debates and really guided our creativity, really. But to summarise it, it goes back to my original artwork, really, which has become a bit more like field research in recent times. Of the whole idea behind this, just to cut a long story short, was looking at the urban landscape in a different way. And through changing of perspective, you can see that the urban landscape is a natural landscape. It's just a different kind of natural landscape. We have this idea that humans are something separate from nature, and the urban landscape is something separate, and it just inherently isn't. And I think that's evident now on the impact we've had on the wider environment. So a lot of these pictures were from things you walk past every day, so shipping containers. But there's an innate beauty in nature, just on a different level. These are a burnt out car and a council estate in Derby, but there's a grandeur to these that isn't perhaps your traditional view of nature. But taking this idea through into our design practice, often in disused space or the spaces that aren't constantly tried to be maintained or sort of hemmed back. You look at motorway verges are a prime example of how you often sat on a motorway traffic jam, and amazing landscapes, just beautiful flowers, but it's how they interact with the built bridges and the underpasses, where that marriage between man and nature and that concrete becomes the backdrop, much like graffiti, the concrete canvas. Can we not use this concept in our urban spaces, that the foil's already there, that we can cast this vegetation onto?
And it's in this very room, you know, look around you here, it's these weathering, these are natural processes that are happening. And there's something cool about this room, you know. And for us, the future doesn't necessarily have to be this clean space of kind of glass and trees. There's something in these processes and in the area around us at the Truman Brewery and beyond. Everywhere we look, these little textural urban layers give soul and character to the area. And we're saying, why do we need to kind of see this as a bad and that trees, etc. are good? There has to be a harmony and a balance in that. You know, there's a reason why we're attracted to these spaces as well, because there's something deeper going on.
Yeah, a realignment and an appreciation of our heritage. It's not just slapping up green walls and just green and everything. There is a history, there's a heritage that is important to address. And again, patterning. Patterns are seen throughout the natural world, and as we've just stated, we are a part of the natural world, and we just happen to create patterns all the time, even in car parks. So a few examples of maybe good, some bad, as we see it, ecological, nature-centred design.
So these are your kind of iconic pictures of how our future could look, and it all seems very exciting, and yeah, this is a place I could see myself being in the future. But then, as in terms of what we do and our experiences, you have to look a little bit deeper and you think, okay, a lot of this actually could be designed in a traditional, almost Victorian way of controlling nature still. We're still having dominion over the space. There's not a deep, complex relationship going on. These places, yeah, a lot of it is evergreens. There's just a lot of trees. There's not any ground cover. And there'll be quite static spaces that you may have a maintenance team in just holding that space. And as we know, real nature always wants to succeed, have succession, evolve. There'll always be movement. And as we see all around us, you know, in urban and rural spaces, a lot of it is just about static control of that one moment. You hold it to that. And for us, we want to look at ecological complexities, just how urban life is very complex and how people are complex. We want to create that relationship with nature in urban situations that have complexity, that have change.
No landscape is static. Landscapes evolve. The urban landscape shouldn't be any different.
And so these are some of the examples from the previous pictures. This is the reality of the situation, where you're coming into places like China with the urban forest that was made on the other one. They're ripping out trees, huge established trees from villages, and the villagers are selling these huge trees, and they're putting them in situ into cities, and it's felt as it's doing a good thing.
Can't be a good thing, can it?
Yeah, and it's failing, you know, and with the green walls, that we think these are really fantastic things to add to the canvas of our urban spaces, but they are not easy to maintain. They're highly controlled spaces, and a lot of the time they don't really help biodiversity. A lot of them are the kind of things that are growing in my grandma's garden. You know? So it's looking at these things as being an interesting idea of moving forward, but we can do better. There's ways of developing these schemes.
There's not to say there's not ingenuity in what they're doing, but there's a fundamental, they're missing the building block of what's at the core of this. So yeah, again, static control, trying to keep a landscape as it is just fundamentally against how landscapes inherently are.
Sustainability, you know, this high maintenance factor of holding these spaces, you know, if we have these huge areas in the future which are immersive experiences in urban spaces, there's going to have to be some relationship with how we govern that space. And with this kind of technique of the traditional way of doing it, it's going to be high maintenance management, unsustainable.
Yeah, and if things fail, then it's just going to give a bad rep to doing anything ecologically minded, because people are just going to think, well, it's going to fail, it's not worth the money, fundamentally. And money's another big issue. It costs a hell of a lot of money to do any of this. But I think the biggest thing is this idea of just chucking a load of plants at something and saying it's ecological. Just isn't the way to go about things, really. There's a deeper connection we're missing, not just sitting next to a tree.
And it's this tick list, isn't it, that the businesses will do. They'll just say we've planted 5 trees over there, and it doesn't actually mean anything, you know, and it's the greenwashing effect. We need to get away from that and have a real understanding for ecology in the future. Yeah,
actually, the word biophilia has been used in quite a good context today, but we see it used all the time as just a really cool word that doesn't mean anything in the way it's being used. It's just a case of it, as I say, throwing a load of plants at something and saying it's biophilic, because people don't necessarily know what it means, but it sounds really cool. So,
and it's also in that way, you know, a lot of architects use those terms, and we've had renders and pictures of designs that they want us to be involved in, and they've done these huge, as I would call them, Victorian-esque style kind of planting schemes, and they say, yeah, this is going to really help people connect, and it's just not realistic. It's nothing to do with what real connection with nature is, you know.
So, on to the other end of the scale, going to something we're a bit more aligned with, like cutting-edge planting design, something that we're very passionate about and constantly learning about, is looking at nature, or the natural landscape, this is where things get complicated, looking how plants work together to create self-sustaining systems, how they grow together, how we can be influenced through that to create high impact but low input schemes in urban spaces. And this has been done on varying success, and it is all about experimentation, but like the Olympic Park's a good example. Also in grassroots areas, seed mixes used to really connect all walks of life to back into sort of natural contact.
And there's some really exciting things going on. This is where the pioneering side of ecological landscaping is really taken off over the last few years. Started off with something like the Highline Project, which is really showing, they looked at the site beforehand and then decided how to emulate that. And it's looking at how ecosystems work and how we can use different planting schemes to lock in the landscape and have succession and change. We can then look at food forestry and permaculture and see how we can use this in our agricultural systems moving forward, and how we can create multi-layered dynamics to that. And then you've got rewilding as well, and seeing how the exciting research that's being done of how implementing rewilding into certain areas becomes fascinating, of how it changes whole areas. And so we're looking at a lot of these different things in the urban landscapes as other people are, and seeing that there's fantastic opportunities here. And we can definitely see from our vision that this is the future, this is where it has to go. But still, there's issues involved in that.
It's not easy. The main issue is, in terms of a practical sense, if you're going to wild the urban landscape, is how is that going to work with the current way the urban landscapes work, so like roads and the way people move about a space?
Yeah, and it's just the human practicalities that are necessary against something like rewilding or putting huge amounts of ecosystem into space. There needs to be a balance moving forward. And with rewilding in particular, it's been said that just little patch networks of it, just here and there, without any real connection, doesn't really benefit at all. So how do we actually create these landscapes to succeed for nature and ourselves? How is there a balance going on with that? And that is really what our work's about, is finding that balance in moving forward.
Maintenance, again, is another massive issue. And again, if things fail, people don't believe in them. Quite often, you do need a bit of experimentation. Lots of pioneering plantsmen are doing it and pushing this forward. But sometimes it doesn't quite go to plan. And if you just see the public's perception, one person's garden could be another person's completely untamed mess. So it's this balance between what's aesthetically beautiful but also ecologically practical.
And it's also very much about the idea of gentrification and price behind these things. The Highline being a perfect example. They created this space and they wanted to create it for the local community, but it became such a positive impact that suddenly everyone was going there. The house prices rose up phenomenally, and then the actual people had to move out from the area. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on when you're putting these things in there. They're expensive, you know, and if you're doing it on any large scale, it's going to cost a lot. So does that mean that it can only work in wealthy areas? What about the council estate that really could benefit from this kind of thing happening there, you know? So a lot of it's understanding how this can be relatable to every situation.
Okay. So, how do we try to create change? I think this, as we began, this need to control, keep landscape static has to go. It's not just about completely letting go. People's perceptions won't let that happen. Not everyone has the same idea of what's beautiful. But more of an editing rather than a maintaining is the way forward.
And a really important thing for me, I think, was we do a lot of work with forest schools and stuff like that as well, and it's all about ecological education. And I'm really of the belief that, you know, control stems from a fear of the unknown, and that's what we do in all walks of life, especially with nature. We try to control it and keep it held down because we don't know enough about it. And if we're able to educate ecologically, young and old, to understand about succession and understand about ecological processes and understand that we are a part of those, then maybe we can hold a new era of stewards rather than dominators. And
also urban ecology, there's so many spaces left unkept, which are so interesting that why can't schools go and visit these brownfield areas where they can walk around and they're just ignored and seen as something completely, something to be got rid of, whereas actually they're the building blocks of really important ecological systems, right on people's doorsteps all the time.
And then the other thing is just trying to get these big businesses and financial sectors to understand how good this is for us all. You know, the idea of prevention rather than cure, and just getting a healthier, happier workforce you know, and selling that to them so that they say, okay, we'll put the money into that and we'll hold these spaces for you and we can create immersive experiences, and what benefit does that have for the people that work here, you know?
I think it was touched on earlier that we've got to work within the systems we're in now, but there isn't time to, even though we're hopefully moving towards a system change, it's not going to change overnight, it's not going to change tomorrow. We have to work within the systems that are already in place, which is big business. So how do we make this appealing to big business, and a healthy workforce is a more productive one, just to make us seem more like machines again, but that is just kind of the system we're in. But if we're going to make change right away, immediately, it's one avenue that can be explored.
So I wanted to show you a few pictures of our visions, and to show an example of how we can create this balance that we see could be an alternative future.
So one of the things we have been very passionate about the past couple of years is getting on different platforms to really shout about the stuff we're passionate about. And Chelsea Flower Show is a massive platform, and a platform that's massive in our industry, but also a platform that seems a little bit dated, needs a bit of a shake-up, and that kind of appeals to us of just rocking the boat a little bit. So this was our proposal, which was accepted.
And within this design, you can see we want to really celebrate the industrial aspects and celebrate urban beauty and its character, as well as informing these rewilding processes, edimentals, which is the edible perennials, food forestry aspects, and ecosystem design where you can have immersive community experiences.
And utilise an existing landscape, not tearing everything down, seeing that beauty that is there just through a change of perspective, using that as that foil to create this, to use as a backdrop for the beauty in front of it.
And luckily enough, we've been able to work with the Truman Brewery as well, thanks to Hannah, which is fantastic, and we're starting a few different phases of developments around this area. And so phase one is just working within the Ely's Yard area in the corner, and we're going to be setting out a lovely woodland corridor and immersive space for the offices here.
So again, a bit of a challenging space and a bit of a challenging thing to get over the line. One of the most interesting things these are the practicalities that constantly come up, which you don't really think of until someone says it to you, is that we weren't allowed to put any trees into the ground, which was initially what we wanted to do. Because as soon as you put a tree in the ground, because it's a protected area, that tree is protected. So if they want to extend the buildings, they can't move that tree. So just so many of these little, really annoying kind of aspects that happen that basically guide creativity. So we're given a bit of a challenging space, but they just guide to a creative solution, which can be quite enjoyable, really, once you get over the initial shock.
And we're also working with Juju's Bar as well, which is going to be really exciting as well. And we're using an area in front of it. Show the other picture as well. Have you got the brown one? And so within that, we're going to be looking at edimentals and permacultural growth, and looking at cocktail tasters. And then we're going to be creating a brown roof at the top there, which is going to be a wild space that interrelates with some of the food forestry aspects.
This was another creative challenge that we had to adhere to, the branding of the bar, which was a mezcal themed bar. But again, gave us a creative challenge. So our solution to this was to use structural plants, so agaves or similar, dotted throughout that roof space, but to create a brown roof. So a brown roof is like a green roof. It will eventually turn into a green roof to some extent, but uses recycled aggregates, and the natural flora will recolonate that aggregate. So it's paying homage to the bar's branding, but also the heavily urban environment it's in.
Yeah, so overall, these are a few little examples of our vision, but the future is all about our joint visions and everybody finding their path and their way forward. And Charles Eisenstein, who I think you should all check out, is great. He's done a lot of writing about climate. And his main theme is resolving this climate change. We need to think holistically across the board, from landscape to community to our everyday issues. And that means, homelessness and knife crime is just as important as the climate issue, and it's very holistic. And together, if we all find our place and our role and our lineage in this then we can create something really, really beautiful for the future. And I think there's still time, you know.
And then, yeah, just to finish on this quote of that legend.
So this is our hero here, and this is what the quote for the human nature has been about: the healing of the land and the purification of the human spirit, the same process. And this guy is a really fantastic example of that. It's almost like a sage. Again, I check him out. It's One Straw Revolution is his book. And he's had this kind of sage mindset where he went into these farms and just let everything go, and it all went to shit. And then he decided, let's start again, and he again let it all go. And he's one of the forefathers of the permaculture and the food forestry revolution. And his idea of letting go and finding that balance, finding a new balance between letting go and gentle editing of space. I think in all of our lives, in anything we do, that is the way to move forward, you know. So thank you very much.